Welcome everybody, I'm Triratna from the Buddhist Centre online team. This is the last week. This is the end, beautiful friends, at least for now. It's been a great series with Paramananda, a whole range of guests, and I'll put in the chat in a minute the YouTube playlist where you can go and rewatch or watch for the first time if you missed any weeks, the different episodes. I'll no doubt thank him again at the end. But yeah, thanks Paramananda for being willing to hold this space with some of your friends and colleagues and sparring partners over the past 6 weeks. It's been totally fascinating, the range of concerns and voices that have emerged. This week, probably a pretty fitting finale. Dhammarati has been such a major influence on Triratna culture, helped shape in a way Triratna culture since the 1980s at least. More importantly, Dhammarati's been a really great friend to many people, a really great supporter of people's practice, much loved, and hopefully today in conversation we'll get to see some of the other sides of him that maybe don't get such an in these days, particularly around design and culture and his deep appreciation of just the aesthetic element of practice and of living generally, which is, again, I think been one of the rivers under the river of Triratna. It's just this kind of attendance to the beautiful and to the excellent in terms of how the Dharma is presented in the West. I think it's still influential. Dhammarati's influence is still playing out all these years later, from beautiful book covers just through to the kind of sophistication of his thinking about structures and ways to bring people into relationship. So I'm sure some of that will emerge today, but thanks to you, Dhammarati, for being willing, despite your better instincts, to show up for today. We've been doing some hand holding in the background, I can tell you that. So I'm going to hand over now to you, Paramananda, and you can introduce this evening's conversation, or this afternoon's conversation, or this morning's conversation, wherever we happen to be in the world. Hope everybody enjoys this.
Thank you, Triratna. Yes, so it is rather a fitting end to this series, actually, because in I think it was 82. 82, I think. I went on my first ever Buddhist retreat. In fact, it was my first ever contact with practicing Buddhism. I'd already meditated, but in a different tradition. And I had I wasn't particularly interested in Buddhism, really. In them days, I was probably more interested in Taoism and Sufi stuff, but I had a sort of generalized interest, and I had a bit of time off work. And me and my partner at the time cycled down to this retreat in Seaford, and we got there, and the retreat had a fantastic team on it, actually. Many of the people still around, and it was Dhammarati who was was the main leading and teaching teacher on that retreat. So Dhammarati initiated me, if you like, into Buddhist meditation. And perhaps it's worth saying, really, that, I mean, while I did take to the meditation, and I also took to the ritual, which was a bit more of a surprise to me, the devotional practices. And since then, Dhammarati has sort of come in and out of my life in various ways. He has very generously designed covers for my book. He was a frequent visitor to San Francisco when I lived out there. He was a president of the centre out there. Before that, we were both persons, but we were chairmen, really, weren't we? But can't say that now, can I? We, in them days, I used to go to the meetings, and we would share a room up at Padmaloka. I remember that very vividly. And he's someone I've always enjoyed and found inspiring, actually, as a person. I think we're both a little bit argumentative, really. So we've had a few arguments in our time, I think, and we've had some very good communication. He was also interesting enough on my ordination retreat. I've got a very nice little story about that, but we'll see if that comes out, which I don't know if Dhammarati will remember or not. But anyway, so I'm delighted to have him here this afternoon for me. And as I said, it's a very sort of fitting last guest on this series, which I've very much enjoyed doing. And so I'm very pleased to have Dhammarati here. He has been critical, quite a critical person in my own involvement with the Dharma and Buddhism. And I'm delighted to be able to talk to him this afternoon. So I'm going to ask Dhammarati, as all our guests have, Dhammarati's brought along something to sort of kickstart the conversation. So I'm going to hand over to Dhammarati and we'll see what he's got for us.
Thanks, Chandradasa. Thanks, Paramananda. Chandradasa, I'll say a little bit before we look at the picture, if that's all right. Yeah, a couple of things actually. Just wanted to say as well, the kind of connection with Paramananda and with Chandradasa actually have both been quite significant ones for me. And if we're talking about sources of inspiration, which is what this series has been about, I think those relationships among a network of relationships would definitely count as major sources of inspiration for me. So again, yeah, so pleased to be taking part in this conversation. I think when I agreed to do it, partly the impulse was a wee bit naive. It was a chance to talk to Paramananda. I think I forgot that there were other people going to be eavesdropping on the conversation. So I had to kind of reframe a little bit. But the reason I asked Chandradasa not to screen share is Paramananda there talking about doing his book covers, which I have done for a couple of his books. And I hope Paramananda doesn't mind, but I wanted to tell, I thought, a lovely little story about the last book cover. So Paramananda's last book was called The Myth of Meditation. Is that right? And there's an image on it by an order member called Vidya Deepa. And I was on the phone talking to Paramananda. He was describing the content of the book, describing what he had been writing about. And as I was talking on the phone, I was also looking at an invitation that I'd just received from the Glasgow Buddhist Centre, inviting me to their Sangha Day. And the invitation was this image. Anyway, Paramananda's telling me about the content of the book and telling me that one of the images that he used in the book, almost one of the themes, was a Wallace Stevens poem. And he quoted the first verse to me. And the first verse was, "I was of three minds, like a tree in which there are three blackbirds." Just that little couplet. And as Paramananda's talking, on my table, I'm looking at a postcard of a painting of a tree with blackbirds in it. And it's one of these moments of synchronicity where I'm listening to an image of blackbirds in a tree from one sense on the phone, and I'm looking at an image of a tree with blackbirds in it that I just got from the Glasgow Centre. And although I think Paramananda was quite keen on a tapias image on the cover, But this was just such a lovely moment of synchronicity. It was just meant to be, I think, that image from Vidya Deepa made it onto the cover of Paramananda's book. And there's something in that, I think, that without spelling it out too much, but that kind of coming together of Paramananda's poetry, his responsiveness to that strand and the culture, the whole presentation of the Dharma, giving the Dharma a form as it always has in sort of written and printed form, and being able to draw on images like Vidya Deepa's image of the black birds and the tree, just that coming together of these different strands of culture, the Dharma expressing itself through these different strands of culture. I mean, certainly in Vidya Deepa's case, that would be explicit. In the Wallace Stevens, I guess, not so explicit, but there's something about that deep awareness and responsiveness to experience that runs through good art that I think's the central flavour, the central strand in the Dharma. So nice to get to recollect that image and that story. And the image that I'd meant to start off with was the one that...
One thing before you go. Just to say, of course, as you know, I think that painting is now in my kitchen, on the wall of my kitchen. Very nice to have. So it worked out well all round. You got something. I got a picture and a cover.
Great. And Vidya Deepa's works, lovely, beautiful images, sort of responding to mainly to Scottish landscape. But so different image, if I can show it. And this is the Rembrandt self-portrait that's in Kenwood House. Kenwood House is in Hampstead Heath in London, and it's one of these sort of unusual experiences, actually, if you've never been to Kenwood, that this painting shares a room with a Vermeer, and Kenwood's not that busy. So you can stand in this room in Kenwood House looking at two of the great paintings from the Western tradition. And quite often you've got the room to yourself. And there's not that many places where you can stand in front of one of the great Rembrandt self-portraits and just dawdle and give it the kind of time and attention that it needs with hardly an interruption. That, of course, was before lockdown started. Let's see what happens after lockdown. But yeah, I wanted to, when Paramananda suggested bringing a piece of writing or a piece of poetry, actually, this is the image that came to mind as a source of inspiration. So this painting, it's one of the late self-portraits. It's not absolutely clear when it was done, but it was done in the last year or two of Rembrandt's life. And a few things to say about it. Rembrandt's life is pretty well known, I think. But in the self-portraits, you can see the marks that life has made on Rembrandt. It's a pretty harrowing biography. Like he had his successes, Rembrandt, but like he was wealthy at times. He was bankrupt at times. 3 of his children died in infancy. His 4th child, Titus, died as a young adult. His wife, Saskia, died the year after Titus was born. And he ended up in a pauper's grave. Nobody knows, I think, where Rembrandt's buried. And after a few years in an unmarked grave, his remains would just have been dug up again and disposed of like any sort of poor man's burial. And I think one of the things that's extraordinary in a Rembrandt is that all the way through, that this is part of a series of, I think, 80 self-portraits and part of a wider series of a lot of portraits. And one of the things that you've got in Rembrandt is this incredible capacity to look absolutely clearly at that kind of painful experience. But the flavour of the attention is always the flavour of awareness and love. And that runs through all of Rembrandt's self-portraits. It runs through pretty much all of Rembrandt's portraits. It almost doesn't matter who Rembrandt's looking at, but you get this incredible clear seeing. If you look at this portrait in particular, maybe we could crop in again, Chandradasa. You're looking at an absolutely honest description of the marks that life has made on Rembrandt, the shape that his experience has taken. It's got that kind of honesty, but there's no trace of sentimentality. There's no trace of self-pity. There's no trace of a kind of story almost about his experience. What you've got is this incredible flavour of awareness, and for want of a better word, love, I think. And I hope it's not too far-fetched, but like the looking for sources of inspiration, thinking why this is such a source of inspiration for me. And the sort of central strand in my life, central strand of inspiration in my life is definitely this, the Buddha's teaching. And the Buddha's summing up of his teaching is that he teaches suffering and the end of suffering. And I think if you look at the Rembrandt, you're looking both at the suffering and at the end of suffering. You're looking at a quality of awareness, a quality of attention that can be totally with the suffering, totally present to it, but not determined by it, not limited by it. There's just this open, responsive, loving awareness that can look absolutely clearly at the experience that's being described. And this is maybe a wee bit more fanciful, like I'm not sure Rembrandt's hat is going to be seen as one of the kind of major icons of Western painting, but there's something about the virtuosity of Rembrandt's painting that even if you're looking at the little detail there, if you look at the fine details in the hair, if you look at the breadth, the boldness of the marks in the hat, you're looking at virtuoso painting. But you're also looking at the more closely you look at the marks that make up a Rembrandt, you've got this mystery. How is it that you can get a flavour of Rembrandt's self-awareness from the 1690s, from the marks that he's made on a piece of canvas? It's a total mystery how that flavour of self-consciousness can be communicated so powerfully. But the closer you look, the harder it is to pin down any of the marks. Paramananda knows this painting well, but you're looking at something that's so bold, that's so impressionistic, that's so soft-edged, that there's nothing you can quite draw a boundary around, nothing that you can quite fix. The whole thing is alive, open, and, for want of a better word, mysterious. So anyway, thanks for being asked to bring a piece of work, and that you could have picked any piece of Rembrandt, you could have picked so many other things, but this, I think, is one of the great bits of work from the Western tradition.
Yeah, I think that was one of the first paintings I ever really responded to. I mean, I wasn't brought up with art, but I've always lived in London, and usually in North London, and I've visited that painting many, many times, and I think that was probably one of the first paintings that really moved me. There's a little essay in one of my books, The Deeper Beauty. There's a little chapter on standing in that room looking at Rembrandt with the Vermeer behind me, and just the contrast between those two paintings. Yeah. So
I didn't know that, Paramananda.
Sorry?
I didn't know that. I would have read it. If I,
In
been aware
deep,
of it.
yeah, there's a chapter about those two paintings. Yeah, and the experience of looking at them. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more about what you said about his painting. I suppose as you were talking, I mean, well, a couple of things going on for me really, because one, it made me quite emotional because I can't look at paintings anymore. I'm afraid of my sight. But the other thing, I was wondering, is that your aspiration as a Buddhist? You know, if that's your inspiration, is it your aspiration to come to that place where you can look at yourself with love, awareness, honesty? I mean, presumably.
Yeah, I'm sure there are reasons that we respond to what we respond to, and there's something in that quality of a. I was going to say quality of awareness. In some ways, I think it doesn't quite do the Rembrandt justice to talk about it just in awareness, because the love is so integral to it. But you know, like I think one of the things. God, how would you talk about it? You know, like trying to think a little bit about sources of inspiration. You know, when I was thinking about this conversation, and you know, there's a flavour, that there's a sort of theme, for want of a better word, that runs through certainly my spiritual practice. I mean, I would probably say that there's a shape that runs through, a motif that runs through everybody's spiritual practice. But that quality of open, clear awareness has been such a kind of significant recurring experience for me. And I think my spiritual practice has been almost to do with trying to find a way to that experience, having glimpses of it, trying to figure out what was it that just happened, and trying to find roots to it as a more of a sustained central current in experience. So I don't know if I would have articulated it like that. I'm kind of articulating my response to the Rembrandt after the fact. But you look at the Rembrandt and you're looking at a quality of mind, a quality of being that, well, certainly I've got a deep response to. I'm moved by, for want of a better word, there's an aspiration towards. I want to be like that. I want to see the world. I want to see myself the way Rembrandt looks at himself or his wife or his mistress or his dying son in his painting.
I mean, many of his paintings are, well, I don't know them all, but you know, he's a fantastic painter, isn't he? There's something particular about the self-portrait, isn't there? Because they are self-portraits. So it's a reflective quality going on there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Well, I think we can be moved to want to respond to the world in that way. But sometimes I think the most difficult thing is actually the turning towards ourselves in that way, isn't it? Which I think takes extraordinary courage in a way. I mean, I don't know what motivated him, but we're just second guessing really, aren't we? But certainly the feeling of it is that there is this intense kind of compassion and honesty. I suppose in a sense he becomes an everyman, doesn't he? You know, you sort of stand, you know, we all get old, don't we? We all suffer the ravages of life, don't we? You know,
Yeah,
nobody escapes it.
So it's amazing seeing the sequence, you know, if you look at the 80 of them and look at it chronologically, and you're just watching this unfolding process of life over a period of 60 odd years. And I think it's true. I think, you know, you're saying in a way it's an everyman, but it's an everyman that doesn't lose any of the absolute precise, specific character of him or any of the other people that he painted. You can really feel the life in them, I think, which points you to something central in meditation practice and points you to something central in Buddhist practice, I think.
I'm also thinking, I mean, we'll come back to that because I think that's such an important point. But I can't help thinking, and maybe this has been a bit unfair because I'm sure there's great artists still doing that sort of work. But actually, most of the images we're confronted with these days are not like that, are they? They're airbrushed, aren't they? They're kind of skin deep, aren't they? And I think the thing about that particular painting is that it does really give you a sense of some inequality of him, doesn't it? And I wonder because, you know, the other thing, you've been a graphic designer, haven't you? You know, you trained as a graphic designer. That's right, isn't it? And so image in itself is obviously very important to you. But I just wonder what it says about our culture now, the nature of image in our culture, as opposed to when he was around doing those paintings. I don't know. I haven't got a point to make. It just struck me that, you know, the glossy magazine image and that image are kind of superficially about human beings, but one has a quality of insight and the other one is sort of cosmetic, isn't it, in a sense?
Although I think we've got the advantage of 400 years of distance from Rembrandt. And, you know, like I think even among his contemporaries, Rembrandt stood out. I remember somebody saying that kind of materialist art history can tell you everything that you need to know about Rembrandt, can tell you about the bourgeois clientele that he had, that were buying portraits, that were buying religious paintings, that were buying still lives, can tell you all about the social context. But it said it can tell you everything about Rembrandt except what was actually important about him. And I think a lot of the work around Rembrandt would have been as facile as a lot of the work that we're immersed in. And my guess is that, you know, like we're a bit on an information overload in this culture. You know, like, for example, I can think of photographers. I've just been looking at photographs by Sebastião Salgado, and Salgado's portraiture, Salgado's documentary pictures of migrants, of mine workers in Brazil. I think you're looking at the same kind of formal awareness, the same kind of empathy. You know, I think Rembrandt really is outstanding. I don't think you're going to find many people to compare to Rembrandt, but you'll find work in this culture that's got that kind of depth and that kind of clarity of awareness, I think.
I mean, just as a point of interest, perhaps to sort of move on, but presumably he didn't sell those paintings. I mean, they weren't painted to sell. Would someone else buy a portrait of Rembrandt?
Interesting question. I don't always know. A lot of Rembrandt's work was sold in reproduction, and he definitely did sell etchings of his portraits. But yeah, interesting. I don't know what happened to the self-portraits and how many he kept.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a very strong start. I don't know where we go from that, really.
Can I quote one of your poems at you? Sorry, one of the poems that you quote in your book.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just do a little ad for the book, actually. really think it's a lovely book. I think one of the things that you do consistently really well is, I was embarrassing myself saying that probably most of the poetry I know is poetry that you quote in your meditation books. But I think you've got such a good ear for poetry that evokes that sort of depth of experience. And before I picked the Rembrandt, actually, one of the quite similar images that I could have chosen was a Hokusai self-portrait. And Hokusai's got a self-portrait at the age of 83, I think it is, and he just, he's rhapsodic about the process of getting old. But the poem that you quote by Roger Keyes, I'm just going to quote a couple of lines from it. But Hokusai says, look carefully. He says, pay attention, notice. I should have been a bit more careful. It matters that you care. It matters that you feel. It matters that you notice. It matters that life lives through you. Contentment is life living through you, and joy is life living through you. And I think one of the things that I respond to that, I'd be interested to hear you talk about it, Paramananda. You know it far better than I do, but I think it points to something essential, that pay attention, notice, that whole thing about plugging into the life living through you. Fundamentally, I think they're the basic building blocks of spiritual practice. And I think what the Rembrandt's pointing at, I think what the Hokusai's pointing at, what the poem's pointing at, what meditation plugs you into, is that whole process of life living through you.
It's funny. I was just going to say, I found in recent years more and more I experience and try and communicate that whole idea that actually, we are just life expressing itself, aren't we? Life is expressing itself as you or me for a few moments, in a way, and try and let it come through. Yeah. And this sort of, again, maybe I'm just down on modern culture, but this idea that we participate in something, we participate in life, and our job really is to allow that energy of life in whatever way, whatever shape it wants to come through us,
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, that's such an interesting thing, great art, whether it's painting or poetry, I think so often does touch upon that. And for me, more and more, that's what Buddhism's about. And I don't know, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I wonder how that fits with this kind of modern kind of tendency to see Buddhism as a sort of a self-actualization.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Or it's like an adaptive, particularly perhaps some of the modern mindfulness movement is kind of adaptive strategy. So we can assert ourselves. It's a subtle difference, isn't it? But for me, it's like very often our own desires isn't really what wants to come through or needs to come through us, I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
Yeah, no, it does, and I think that the tradition had to have a couple. The Buddhist tradition had to have a couple of goes at things. I think the fact that compassion it seems, got more and more of an explicit emphasis in the later tradition. You know, I don't want to read too much into the history, but it's almost like in meditation practice, you know, you can see the way it's been adapted and the way it's being adopted. You can do it in a way that's a sort of refinement within something quite self-referential. And I think that emphasis in the Buddhist tradition, that wisdom, that sort of clear seeing and compassion are almost just two dimensions of a single experience. Like that's why I was at such kind of pedantic about that quality of attention that you get in Rembrandt. That there's nothing clinical about it. It's love as much as awareness, and it is distinctive in the self-portraits, but the same flavours there in the portraits. There's that same responsiveness and love. And I totally agree with you when you're saying that it's almost like life expressing itself through us. You know, that we draw a boundary in our experience that I think isn't there in reality, and the tradition's trying to find 100 ways of articulating that. As you start to look deeper, as long as your attention's both on the self and on the other, and yet you're equally attending to both poles of that experience, you're opening up into something where that polarization, where that boundary gets much more fluid.
Yes, it's interesting. I'm probably being a bit pedantic, but I must say I'm quite. Maybe for my own egotistic reasons, but I'm quite. I don't like. I'm less comfortable with the metaphor of seeing these days, I must say.
Yeah, of course.
Or you know, you keep saying clear seeing. My response much more now is it's about I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but when we talk about, because Buddhism does talk a lot within the visual metaphor, doesn't it? Although I'm not a good enough Pali. I'm not a very good Buddhist really from that point of view. I haven't really studied Buddhism for years, and I don't know what the word is that's getting translated as seeing or I feel much more comfortable with feeling, you know, thinking that for us to approach reality is a feel, you know, it's a feeling, you know, it's got much more to do with feeling and this sort of seeing. I can't help thinking sometimes the danger of placing a distance between us and reality, as if reality is something outside of ourselves. Yeah? And I think this is very often how it's spoken about, you know, seeing reality as it really is. Well, isn't it feeling reality as it really is? Mm. And aren't we equally reality? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Paramananda. I was, again, getting back to one of your books, like I was reading one of the exercises that you had people doing of feeling their toes. And I was really struck by one of the phrases in it of mind not being located in the brains, but mind located in your toes. Mind is, in a way, the sort of totality of experience. And I think you're right that if I'm going to generalize about this culture, I think that there's easily accessible, slightly alienated experience that you can access in meditation. And one of the things that I've really appreciated in the flavour of your meditation teaching and the flavour of your writing is that sense of something much more grounded, embodied, rooted, like a much more of a sensed, total experience. Like I think you're right. I think seeing's a tempting metaphor, but it's a partial one.
Yeah. But now, anyway, we should maybe come back to your own. I wonder if there's any other kind of sources of inspiration that you would like to highlight. Any other things in your life that you feel have been well, important in your spiritual life?
So it might just be that I've got a train of thought going that I'm reluctant to leave.
I am reluctant. I must admit, I'm quite happy, but I didn't want it to get. Well, I don't mind actually. I'm very happy if we can just carry on as we are. But I don't know.
I did want to bring in a second source actually, and it kind of follows on a bit, I hope, from what we were talking about. So we've got about 15 minutes left, I think. Yeah. Which I can't believe. I was wondering what we were going to talk about.
I know how quick it goes. That's why I say.
Yeah. But I mean, it's back to this theme of self and other, actually, and I think one of the sources of inspiration, again, a kind of an obvious one, is relationship and communication. And, it's interesting, even just that last conversation, like my mind's built a certain way, my senses work a certain way, I'm visual, I'll tend to use the metaphors of seeing. And there's something about the, just even in this conversation, engaging with the kind your quality of awareness, the sort of feel of your awareness, and how that fills out and extends my own. And I wanted to mention, like I had a look at the first interview that you did with Attila, who was also on that same retreat team. I'm sorry it's such a kind of small circle, but I know Attila well. And I suppose my experience of communication with Attila, again, was, you were describing him as a therapist. And talking about those early retreats where you'd sit Attila in front of somebody, he'd start a conversation, he'd say, "How you doing?" And 5 minutes later, they're in tears. Yeah. And you're saying, in a way, his career as a therapist was just a natural extension of a natural empathy. And again, there's this, I think, totally mysterious thing, like Attila's self-awareness was kind of hard won, like painful early experiences, but this real capacity, there's something of the flavour of Rembrandt's awareness and Attila's awareness, I think, and that capacity, because he's so ease with the whole spectrum of his experience, it's almost like he can open that space up for others, and because he's got access to it, he somehow in communication, other people have easier access to that depth of awareness by learning from, in a very kind of unconceptual way, from his experience. I wanted to mention you on retreat. Actually, like probably the last time I spent a chunk of time with you was on retreat in California. And you were leading the meditations. And again, I think your capacity for self-awareness, like the whole quality, that very grounded quality of your awareness, flavours a retreat. I think people have access to a grounded, embodied way of experiencing, in quite subtle ways, just almost the kind of flavour atmosphere that you create. And there's something about community as, well, to speak personally, my own partial, kind of highly conditioned, preferential, limited awareness comes into relationship. And there's something about that quality of relationship that gives me access to broader, deeper experience than I would have under my own steam. And I think another source of inspiration is the commitment to the network of personal relationships between people who are trying to find their own very distinct way of moving towards that deeper, more open, more responsive quality of awareness. A lot of my work in the last 10 years, I was thinking my work inspires me. A lot of my work, I think Chandra Dasa mentioned it, is trying to create ways of bringing people into relationship with each other. And I think I can't do it in the way that you do. I can't do it in the way that Attila does, but that activity of creating connection and creating community, in the sense that you're in relationship with people that on a deep level you admire, resonate with, are supported by, and what's sort of centrally important to you. So that relationship, I think.
Mm.
I'm worried that it's a bit facile, that basically I end up with pay attention to your experience and come into relationship with people that are doing the same. That's my sources of inspiration.
Mm. 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 Well, I don't think that's facile at all. I think that's what we're all trying to do in a way, isn't it? I did just want to say, maybe this is a bit facile, but you brought Attila in, and of course, for me, you and Attila in a way are not a pair, but because I met you both at the same time, and you both had a strong influence on me. And of course, you used to live together, didn't you, in London? And
yeah, for years.
But what I was going to say, when you were talking about Attila, I thought he doesn't actually look so dissimilar from Rembrandt, does he? Well, Rembrandt.
Yeah, really. Yep.
They look a bit alike, don't they? And I think that's you mentioned it when you were talking about the Rembrandt. I don't know if you use this word, but when I think of Attila, and I think of that particular portrait, self-portrait, you do get a real sense of vulnerability, don't you? And I think that's what Attila's been able to do. And I think in a way that's, listen, for people to be able to live with and creatively use their vulnerability is such an important part of the thing, such an important part of what we're trying to get at, because what you respond to in Rembrandt, go right back to the beginning of our conversation, in a way it's the humanity of it, isn't it? Or it's that it's so human, isn't it? It's all there, isn't it? Impermanence,
yeah,
vulnerability, old age, it's all kind of there. And of course we need, of course that's just one side, isn't it? One side of it. And when we're young and you happen to, you've got this, well, of course, there's different types of vitality, but I don't want young people to grow old prematurely, mentally or in spirit. To be young is to be young, isn't it? But I don't know if it's so much about age, because of course we're vulnerable. You mentioned all his children that died when he had babies, as young people. And of course, we're vulnerable throughout our lives in one way or the other, aren't we? You know. And I wonder how you respond to this. 'Cause I think for me these days is that I want people to feel comfortable with the fact that they're vulnerable. You know, we are vulnerable. You know.
I was thinking when you were speaking that you were describing Akla and Rembrandt, and I think you're right about the vulnerable, and at the same time not in the slightest bit defended, which is the habit in relationship to our vulnerability.
Yeah.
You know, and getting back to the structure of your book, you start off with this thing about turning towards, and I think what you're learning, what Buddhist practice is trying to teach us all the time, is that it's possible to just turn towards, to attend to open up to experience whatever it is. And in that whole spectrum of openness, you're open to your joy without clinging to it. You're open to your pain without defending yourself against it. And in that openness, you're allowing life to flow through you.
I mean, I'm sorry we haven't got a lot more time actually, Dhammarati, because it'd be so interesting to talk a little bit about how, because you have given your life to creating structures that allow communication, allow sangha, allow community, and you spent your life doing that. At least that's been a huge part of your life. And I'm so interested in how these things fit together, how we can make structures that do allow people to be vulnerable and do allow people to bloom within that vulnerability and within that structure. Yeah. What are the conflicts? It's such an interesting area, isn't it?
No, it's such a great question, Paramananda. I was thinking Attila works one-on-one. You work in a retreat context, and I'm kind of interested in how do you make it scalable? What are the principles that support a community more broadly in a way that supports that kind of self-awareness? Full marks to Chandradasa, like you and I are managing to have a conversation, but on a platform that Chandradasa and his team have built that makes this experience widely available. But no, I think that structural question, that's one I'm really interested in.
Yeah. I will, hopefully, maybe we can do this again. I was thinking with a number of the guests, I would just like to just have them back actually, and certainly with you, like I would love to have a chance to explore that a bit more. That whole. Because you're obviously inspired by that, and how important that is to have people that will give their life to doing that. That's obviously. But when I was thinking of this sources of inspiration, I think, well, what is it that keeps people going in that spiritual life? And that, that seems to me is one of the things that has kept you going and kept you engaged and kept you alive and kept you, working so dynamically towards that,
I think that's true. Conversations like this, but if I can finish just with a specific online Zoom meeting, right? So routine meeting, part of the International Council. And I realise I'm on Zoom with somebody in Australia, somebody in India, somebody in Holland, somebody in Dublin, me in Herefordshire. And I've got no idea what the agenda was, but I'm listening to a group of people, all of whom have given their lives to making the Dharma available. So Visandra had a lovely one-liner. He says, we're involved in a collaborative project that goes back 2,500 years to liberate beings from suffering. And just that sense of you're part of this collaboration that lets you be part of, really tangibly part of something bigger than you are, bigger than I am. And the collaboration in itself is a source of inspiration. And the shared project of giving people the tools that let them engage with their own experience with awareness and love. What else would you do? You know?
Yeah.
What
yeah.
a privilege.
And to add to that, of course, our need, you know, our individual need for belonging as well, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. Connection, part of your deep nature.
Mm. Mm.
So well done for setting up these conversations.
Well, thank you very much for coming and joining us. And, I can't see what's the time. I can't see the time. So
your time sense is perfect. Your time sense is perfect, Paramananda. That's 1 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Sorry, where you are.
Thank you very much, Dhammarati. It's been a delight to speak to you.
Likewise.
Yeah, thank you, both of you. That was a very beautiful conversation. Let's just do a season 2. Put your hands up if you'd like them to do a season 2. Should we do a follow-up season? We could be like tiny Netflix. Yeah, no, thanks. That was really great. There's a lot to sort of reflect on. I wish we had more time as well. You should be able to download the chat if you want the links to Hokusai, to the poem by Hokusai, to Rembrandt's whole set of self-portraits, which are really worth working your way through, and various other bits and bobs. We will email everybody who booked on the event all of the links from all of the talks in the next week or so. So my thanks to you, Dhammarati. I know you had to overcome a certain amount of reluctance to do that, but the sort of facility you have for communicating about what you love is just sort of an ongoing inspiration to me, listening to you. And actually, you probably don't know this in the audience, but I think if it wasn't for Dhammarati, the Buddhist Centre Online wouldn't exist. So it's quite a kind of deep set of relationships, even in this kind of very contemporary context for Triratna. Dhammarati helped kind of shape the context for this to emerge over the years. And Paramananda, thanks to you too, just for being willing again to show up and sort of, I think, kind of hang out at the sort of more radical edge of what Triratna is capable of doing, just in terms of evoking the Dharma life. And there's many different approaches online. You could even argue that the world is saturated in Triratna approaches or Buddhist approaches online, but I think these kind of conversations, it would be hard for somebody to listen and not understand what moves people to kind of give their life in love and service in this sort of way. And I think you exemplify that really beautifully. So thank you, both of you. Have a look out at buddhistcentre.com/live for news of whatever second series of this we can get going. Maybe we can rope Dhammarati into some more events if we all cross our fingers and say, I do believe in fairies or something. And you can sign up for a newsletter there. You can make a donation, which would be very welcome. We're not the best funded platform in the universe. We're not Facebook. So feel free to help us set up more events like this in future. Of course, the whole thing is dana, including the effort of the people showing up for the conversations. So it's given with that in that kind of spirit. So thank you for taking part in that. And as ever, I'm going to switch to gallery view, and I suggest you do the same. Feel free to unmute yourselves as you take your leave.
Lovely to see everybody.
Thank you. So nice to hear you, see you.
Hey Jaya Chitta.
Hey Dhammarati.
Hey Parami. Hey Shunyamala. Hey Shraddha Gita.
Great to see you. Thanks so much. Really great to see you. And thanks, Paramananda, for all the conversation.